The red-tailed hawk spiraled down from the cloudless Wyoming sky with blood streaking across its wing, and Bethany Morrison knew she had maybe minutes to save its life before the predator became prey to the circling vultures above. She ran from the small cabin she shared with her father, leather gloves already on her hands, calling out in the soft clicking sounds she had learned from the Shoshone woman who lived 3 miles east. The year was 1876, and out here in the Wind River Range, survival meant understanding the language of wild things. The hawk landed hard 20 feet from her, talons scraping against the rocky soil. Bethany slowed her approach, keeping her breathing steady and her movements deliberate. She had been working with injured birds since she was 14, and now at 22, her reputation had spread through the scattered settlements. Miners, trappers, and homesteaders all knew about the Morrison girl who could gentle the fiercest raptor and send it back to the sky. "Easy now," she murmured, crouching low. The hawk's golden eyes fixed on her with that razor-sharp intelligence that always made her breath catch. This one was male, probably 3 years old, with a wingspan that would stretch past her outstretched arms. Someone had shot at him, whether intentionally or by accident she could not tell, but the bullet had grazed his left wing near the shoulder joint. The hawk mantled his wings in warning, but Bethany had done this dance 100 times before. She kept talking, kept her voice low and rhythmic, and slowly extended her leather-covered forearm. The hawk hissed, but she saw the exhaustion in his posture, the way his injured wing trembled. He had maybe one more flight in him before he dropped for good. "I can help you," she said. "But you have to trust me." The hawk watched her for another long moment, then folded his wings and stepped onto her arm with surprising delicacy. His talons gripped firmly but did not puncture through the thick leather. Bethany stood slowly, keeping her arm stable, and walked back toward the cabin. Her father would be in town for another 2 days, trading furs and buying supplies, which meant she had the place to herself. Good. She worked better without his constant fretting. Inside, she had converted the small back room into a makeshift aviary. 2 large cages stood against the wall, both currently empty. She had released a barn owl just last week, its broken leg healed and strong. Before that, a kestrel with a damaged eye that would never see quite right but could still hunt well enough to survive. She settled the hawk into the larger cage, speaking softly the entire time. He hopped from her arm to the perch without resistance, and she quickly checked the wound. The bleeding had mostly stopped, but she would need to clean it properly and watch for infection. Mountain fever could kill a bird this size in less than 3 days. Bethany worked through the afternoon, cleaning the wound with water she had boiled and cooled, applying a poultice made from yarrow and sage. The hawk submitted to her ministrations with surprising calm, as if he understood she meant to help. When she finished, she offered him strips of dried venison from her supplies. He ate carefully from her palm, and something in her chest loosened. "You are going to be just fine," she told him. "A week, maybe 2, and you will be back up there where you belong." She named him Redstone for the rust-colored patches on his breast, and over the next 3 days she tended to him morning, noon, and night. Her father returned from town with news that gold had been found further north, that more prospectors would be flooding into the territory, that they should consider selling their land and moving somewhere safer. "These mountains are getting too crowded," Thomas Morrison said, unpacking coffee and flour onto the rough-hewn table. "There was a shooting in town last week, 3 men dead over a claim dispute." "We have been here for 8 years," Bethany replied, stirring the pot of stew that hung over the fire. "Where would we go? Pendleton, Oregon, maybe. Your aunt writes that it is growing into a proper town. Schools, churches, law and order." Bethany thought about the hawk healing in the back room, about the way the mountains turned purple at sunset, about the crystalline silence of winter mornings when snow muffled every sound. She thought about starting over in some flat farming community where the sky felt too close and the horizons too distant. "I like it here," she said quietly. Her father sighed, a sound she had heard often since her mother died of pneumonia 5 winters back. "You are too much like her." Stubborn as the day is long. But he dropped the subject, and Bethany returned to her routine. Every morning she checked Redstone's wing, pleased to see the healing progress. Every evening she fed him from her hand, talking to him about her day, about the deer she had seen at the creek, about her father's worries and her own uncertain future. On the 7th day, she opened the cage door and extended her arm. Redstone hopped onto it immediately, and she carried him outside into the cool morning air. The sky stretched endless and blue overhead, and she felt him tense with longing. "Not yet," she said. "Another week." But she let him perch on the wooden post she had planted in the yard, let him stretch his wings and feel the wind. He stayed there for hours while she worked in the small garden, pulling weeds and checking the potato plants. When the afternoon sun grew too hot, he called out in that high, piercing cry, and she came to collect him. That was when she saw the man watching from the tree line. He was huge, broad-shouldered and thick with muscle, dressed in buckskin that had been worked soft and dark. His hair hung past his shoulders, brown shot through with sun-bleached streaks, and a full beard covered his jaw. He stood completely still, one hand resting on the long rifle slung across his back. And even from 50 yards away, Bethany could feel the weight of his stare. Her heart kicked hard against her ribs. They were a mile from the nearest neighbor, and her father had gone out to check his trap line. She was alone except for the hawk and her father's old Colt revolver hanging on the wall inside. "Can I help you?" She called out, proud when her voice came out steady. The man started walking toward her, moving with the fluid grace of someone who spent more time in the wilderness than among people. As he drew closer, she could make out his features better. Sharp cheekbones, a nose that had been broken at least once, eyes the color of storm clouds. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe 30, and there was something dangerous in the way he moved, like a wolf deciding whether to attack or retreat. He stopped 10 feet away, those gray eyes moving from her to Redstone and back again. "That is a fine bird." His voice was deep, rough from disuse, with an accent she could not quite place. Not Eastern, but not fully Western either. "Thank you," she said carefully. "He is healing from an injury." "I saw." The man tilted his head slightly, studying Redstone with unexpected intensity. "Red tail, 3 years old, shot within the last week. You have a gift for this work." Bethany felt her wariness shift slightly toward curiosity. "You know birds. I know mountain things." He shifted his weight, and she saw a pair of rabbits dangling from his belt, freshly killed. "My name is Boone Zimmerman. I have a cabin about 8 miles north, up toward Granite Peak." The name meant nothing to her, but that was not unusual. Mountain men came and went, some staying for a season, others for years. They were a breed apart, comfortable with solitude and silence, more at home with animals than people. "Bethany Morrison," she replied. "My father and I have the homestead here." Boone nodded once, a short, economical movement. His gaze returned to Redstone, and something in his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "May I?" She hesitated, then nodded. Boone approached slowly, and Redstone tracked his movement with keen interest but no fear. When Boone extended one blunt-fingered hand toward the hawk, Bethany expected her bird to mantle or hiss, but instead Redstone leaned forward and allowed the mountain man to stroke the feathers of his breast. "You have done this before," Bethany said, surprised. "I had a hawk once." Boone's voice had gone even quieter, almost reverent. "Golden eagle, actually. Found her with a broken wing when she was barely old enough to fly. Nursed her back, and she stayed with me for 3 years. What happened to her? She found a mate. Flew off one spring and never came back." He pulled his hand away, and his expression closed off again, returning to that careful neutrality. As it should be. An awkward silence stretched between them. Bethany became aware of how she must look, her dark hair escaping its braid, her dress dusty from garden work, dirt under her fingernails. Boone seemed utterly unbothered, patient in the way only wilderness folk could be. "Would you like some water?" she finally asked. "Or coffee, if you can wait while I heat it. Water would be welcome." She gestured toward the cabin, and Boone followed at a respectful distance. Redstone remained on his perch, eyeing them both. Inside, Bethany poured water from the pitcher into a tin cup and handed it to him. Boone drank it down in 3 long swallows, his throat working, and she tried not to stare at the corded muscles of his neck. "Thank you." He set the cup down carefully on the table. "Your father is Thomas Morrison. You know him. We have met. I sold him some beaver pelts last winter. He mentioned he had a daughter." Boone paused, then added, "He did not mention the birds." "He thinks it is a waste of time," Bethany admitted. "Healing creatures that would die anyway in the wild. Everything dies eventually. That does not make the healing a waste." The words settled into her chest, warm and affirming in a way she had not expected. She studied Boone more carefully now, noting the intelligence in his eyes, the deliberate way he moved through her space without disturbing anything. He was not like the rowdy miners who came through, or the nervous homesteaders always looking over their shoulders. He had the stillness of deep water. "Why did you come here today?" she asked. Boone met her gaze directly. "I saw your hawk circling 3 days ago, saw him dive and not come back up. I tracked him to your property, saw you take him inside. I wanted to make sure he was being properly cared for." "You tracked an injured hawk for 8 miles. "I wanted to make sure," he repeated simply. Something in Bethany's stomach fluttered, a sensation she had not felt in years. Not since Jacob Harrison had courted her briefly before deciding homestead life was not for him and heading back east. She pushed the feeling away, focusing instead on the practical. "He is healing well. Another week and I will release him." Boone nodded, then glanced toward the window where Redstone was visible on his perch. "Mind if I stop by in a few days? I would like to see how he is progressing." "Of course not." He moved toward the door, then paused and turned back. "You should know, there are 3 prospectors camped about 2 miles east of here. They have been drinking heavily and shooting at anything that moves. Keep your hawk inside until they move on." A chill ran through her. "How do you know this?" "I make it my business to know who is in these mountains." His expression had gone hard, and she caught a glimpse of something fierce beneath his calm exterior. "Your father should be back tonight, yes. By dark, usually." "Good." "I will check the perimeter before I leave. Make sure those men are not heading this direction." Before Bethany could respond, he was gone, moving out the door with that same fluid grace. She watched through the window as he walked the border of their property, eyes scanning the ground, pausing occasionally to examine something she could not see. He circled the entire homestead before heading back toward the tree line, and just before he disappeared into the forest, he raised one hand in farewell. Redstone called out, a sharp cry that sounded almost like greeting, and Boone paused to look back at the hawk for a long moment before vanishing among the pines. Her father returned that evening with a string of trout and news that the prospectors camped east had been run off by the territorial marshal for threatening other settlers. Thomas Morrison seemed in better spirits than usual, and Bethany wondered if Boone had something to do with that. Mountain men had their own ways of communicating, and she would not put it past Boone to have had a word with the marshal himself. Over the next week, Boone returned 3 times. Each visit was brief, ostensibly to check on Redstone's progress, but Bethany noticed the way his eyes lingered on her, the way he always positioned himself between her and any potential threat. He brought gifts too, though he presented them casually. A pair of fine rabbit pelts, perfectly tanned. A basket of wild strawberries, rare this early in the season. A chunk of honeycomb wrapped in oiled cloth. "You do not have to bring things," she told him on his 3rd visit, even as she accepted the honeycomb gratefully. "I know." Boone watched her set it on the table, his expression unreadable. "But I want to." Thomas Morrison seemed uncertain about the mountain man's attention to his daughter, but he could not fault Boone's manners or his obvious skill. More than that, Bethany suspected her father recognized something in Boone that he respected. A competence, a self-sufficiency that was essential in this country. On the 14th day, Bethany knew Redstone was ready to fly. His wing had healed cleanly, the feathers strong and flexible. She carried him outside at dawn when the air was cool and the sky was painted rose and gold. Boone had arrived just minutes earlier, as if he had known this would be the day. "You came to say goodbye to him," Bethany said. "I came to see him fly." Boone stood beside her, close enough that she could smell pine and wood smoke on his clothes. "And to see you set him free." She extended her arms skyward, giving Redstone the launch point he needed. "Go on, beautiful, back where you belong." The hawk spread his wings, feeling the air currents, testing his strength. Then with a powerful thrust, he launched himself into the sky. His wings beat strongly, carrying him up and up, spiraling higher with each pass. Bethany watched with the bittersweet ache she always felt at these moments. Joy at the healing completed, sadness at the goodbye. Redstone circled 3 times, calling out in that piercing cry, then headed south toward the higher peaks. Bethany expected him to disappear, but instead he turned and flew back, swooping low over where she stood. He passed so close she felt the wind from his wings, and then he was climbing again, heading south for good this time. "He was saying thank you," Boone said quietly. "I know." Bethany blinked against the sudden sting in her eyes. "They usually do not come back at all. That one will." She turned to look at him. "What makes you say that?" Boone met her gaze, and the intensity there made her breath catch. "Some things are worth returning to." The moment stretched between them, charged with meaning she was not quite ready to examine. Then Boone looked away, clearing his throat. "I should go. I have traps to check. Will you come back?" The words were out before she could stop them. "Yes." No hesitation, just simple certainty. "If you want me to, I do." Something shifted in his expression, a warmth breaking through his usual reserve. "Then I will be back tomorrow." He kept his word. He came the next day and the day after that, and soon his visits became part of her routine. Sometimes he helped her father with heavy work, chopping wood or repairing the cabin roof. Sometimes he simply sat on the porch and talked with her about the mountains, about the animals he observed, about the changing seasons. He had a way of speaking that made everything sound like poetry, describing the world with a precision and beauty that caught her off guard. 3 weeks after Redstone's release, Bethany was working in the garden when she heard the familiar cry. She looked up to see the hawk circling overhead, then diving down to land on the fence post. He folded his wings and regarded her with those sharp golden eyes, looking healthy and strong. "You came back," she breathed, moving slowly toward him. Redstone allowed her to approach, even stepped onto her arm when she offered it. She checked him over carefully, but he bore no new injuries. He had simply returned for a visit, just as Boone had predicted. "Told you so." She spun to find Boone leaning against the cabin wall, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. It was the first time she had seen him truly smile, and it transformed his entire face, making him look younger and almost boyish. "How did you know?" she demanded. "Because he loves you." Boone pushed off the wall and walked toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. And when something loves you, it finds its way back. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Boone." "I am not good with words, Bethany, not the flowery kind anyway." He stopped in front of her, close enough to touch. "But I need you to know that I have been coming here for more than just the bird. I know." "You do?" "I am not blind," she smiled despite her nervousness. "You bring me gifts, you help my father, you look at me like I am something precious. You are." The words came out rough, almost harsh. "You are precious, and you are brave, and you understand things most people never even see." Redstone chirped softly on her arm, as if offering encouragement. Bethany reached out with her free hand and touched Boone's bearded jaw, feeling the coarse hair against her palm. He went very still, his breathing shallow. "I am not good at this either," she admitted. "Courting and romance and all those things girls are supposed to know. I spend my time with wounded birds, not people. That is what I love about you." Boone covered her hand with his, pressing it more firmly against his face. "You see the wounded things and you make them whole. Even wounded mountain men, especially those." He kissed her then, carefully, as if she might startle and fly away. His lips were warm and soft beneath the beard, and the kiss tasted like pine and wild honey. Bethany leaned into it, her entire body singing with the rightness of it. Redstone launched off her arm with an indignant cry, flying to a nearby tree, but she barely noticed. When they finally pulled apart, Boone rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly. Ask your father's permission, bring you proper gifts, all of it. You have been courting me for weeks. Then I want to make it official." He pulled back enough to look at her seriously. "I want everyone to know that you are mine if you will have me. I will have you." The words felt like a vow. "I have been yours since you first touched Redstone and he did not try to tear your hand off." Boone laughed, a deep, rolling sound that she felt in her chest. "High standards." "The highest." Thomas Morrison gave his permission that very evening, though not without a long, serious conversation with Boone about intentions and responsibilities. Bethany listened from the other room, touched by her father's protectiveness and Boone's patient, respectful responses. When they finally shook hands, she knew it was settled. The courting that followed was unlike anything Bethany had imagined. Boone took her into the mountains, showing her hidden waterfalls and meadows carpeted with wildflowers. He taught her to read animal tracks, to move silently through the forest, to find north by the stars. In return, she shared her knowledge of healing plants, of bird behavior, of the small, careful work of mending broken things. Redstone returned every few days, sometimes staying for hours, sometimes just making a brief appearance before flying off again. Boone always greeted the hawk with quiet reverence, and Bethany fell a little more in love with him each time. Summer deepened into its full heat, and the mountains blazed with life. Boone kissed her under the aspens, held her hand while they walked beside rushing streams, told her stories of his childhood in Pennsylvania and his journey west after his parents died. He had been alone for so long, he said, that he had forgotten what it felt like to want to stay in one place. "But you make me want to stay," he told her one evening as they sat on the cabin porch watching the sunset. "You make me want to build something permanent." "Like what?" "Like a home. A family." He turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious, like a future. Bethany's breath caught. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "Not yet." Boone took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "But I am telling you that I want to, soon, when the time is right." What would make the time right? When I have something to offer you besides a one-room cabin and a life of hardship." She pulled her hand from his, irritation flaring. "Do you think I care about that? I grew up in a one-room cabin. I know hardship." "I know you do. But I want to give you better." "I do not want better." She stood, pacing across the porch. "I want you, just you. The rest is details." Boone rose and caught her arm gently, turning her to face him. "Bethany Morrison, you are the stubbornest woman I have ever met." "Good." She lifted her chin. "Because you are the stubbornest man, and we are well matched." He kissed her again, deeper this time, his hands tangling in her hair. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life making you happy." "Yes." No hesitation, no doubt. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married in late August by the circuit preacher who came through once a season. It was a simple ceremony held outside the cabin, with Thomas Morrison and a handful of neighbors in attendance. Bethany wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her taller frame, and carried a bouquet of wildflowers Boone had picked at dawn. Boone wore clean buckskins and had trimmed his beard, though his hair still hung long and wild past his shoulders. The moment the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Redstone appeared overhead, circling and calling out as if in celebration. The small gathering laughed, and Boone pulled Bethany close, kissing her soundly while the hawk cried out his approval. "Even the birds bless this union," the preacher said, smiling. "That is a good omen if ever I saw one." They spent their wedding night in Boone's cabin, which sat high on a ridge with a view of 3 valleys. It was small but well built, with a stone fireplace and sturdy furniture Boone had made himself. He had cleaned it thoroughly and filled it with late summer wildflowers, making it as welcoming as he knew how. Bethany explored every corner while Boone built up the fire, running her hands over the smooth wood of the table, examining his few possessions. Everything was practical, functional, but made with care. She could see his life in these objects, could imagine him here alone through long winters, and her heart ached for all those lonely years. "No more," she said, turning to find him watching her. "You will never be alone again." "Neither will you." He came to her then, and the awkwardness she had feared never materialized. Boone touched her with the same careful reverence he showed injured birds, learning the landscape of her body with patient attention. When he finally claimed her fully, it hurt less than she had expected and felt more right than she could have imagined. Afterward, they lay tangled together in his bed, her head on his broad chest, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her shoulder. "I love you," he said into the darkness. "I have loved you since I saw you standing in that yard with a hawk on your arm, looking fierce and gentle all at once. I love you too." She pressed a kiss to his chest, feeling his heart beat strong and steady beneath her lips. "I loved you when you understood about Redstone, when you saw what I see in these wild things." "We are wild things ourselves," Boone said, "making a life in wild places." "Yes." She smiled against his skin, "and I would not have it any other way." They settled into married life with surprising ease. Bethany moved her bird supplies and cages to Boone's cabin, setting up her healing space in the corner. Boone built her a proper aviary outside, with multiple perches and a space large enough for even the largest raptors. Thomas Morrison visited often, pleased to see his daughter so happy, and eventually sold his cabin to a young family moving west, using the money to build a small addition onto Boone and Bethany's place. "I am getting too old to live alone," he said gruffly, though they all knew he simply wanted to be near his daughter and her new husband. Redstone continued to return regularly, bringing his mate after a few months. Bethany was thrilled to discover the female was nesting nearby, and by the following spring, she spotted the pair teaching their young to hunt. The sight of Redstone circling with his offspring filled her with fierce pride. "He is a father now," she told Boone one evening as they watched the Hawk family hunting together. "Our first patient, and now he has a family of his own." "Like us," Boone said, his hand settling on her still flat stomach. Bethany covered his hand with hers, joy blooming through her chest. "How did you know?" You get a look on your face, peaceful and wondering all at once. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "How far along?" 2 months, I think. I wanted to be sure before I told you." Boone turned her in his arms, his expression full of awe and something like fear. "I do not know how to be a father, and I do not know how to be a mother." She cupped his bearded face in her hands. "But we will figure it out together, just like we figure out everything else." "What if I am no good at it? You are good at everything that matters. You are patient and kind and strong. You will be an excellent father." He kissed her then, pouring all his love and fear and hope into the contact. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. A spring baby, if I am calculating right." "A spring baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Born when everything is coming back to life." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through fall and into winter. Bethany continued her bird work as long as she could, though Boone grew increasingly protective as she grew rounder. He insisted on doing all the heavy lifting, on checking the perimeter of their property every night, on making sure she ate enough and rested often. "You are going to drive me mad with all this fussing," she told him one snowy evening in January, but she said it fondly, secretly pleased by his attentiveness. "Good." He knelt beside her chair and placed his hand on her swollen belly, feeling their child kick against his palm. "Somebody has to look after you since you refuse to look after yourself properly. I am perfectly capable of looking after myself." "Capable, yes. Willing, no," he grinned up at her. "That is why you need me." She could not argue with that. The truth was, she loved having him near, loved the way he watched over her with such fierce devotion. It made her feel precious and protected in ways she had never experienced before. Winter deepened, and Bethany focused on preparing for the baby's arrival. She sewed tiny clothes and blankets, making everything soft and warm. Boone carved a cradle from pine, working on it by the fire every evening, sanding the wood until it was smooth as glass. Thomas Morrison contributed a patchwork quilt his wife had made years ago, which he had been saving for grandchildren. "She would be so happy," he said, his eyes distant with memory. "She always wanted you to have babies of your own." Bethany hugged her father tightly, grateful for his presence, for the way he had accepted Boone so completely. The three of them made a good family, she thought. Soon to be 4. Redstone still appeared occasionally, even in winter, landing on the aviary posts and calling out his presence. Boone always brought him scraps of meat when he showed up, and the hawk had grown comfortable enough to eat from Boone's hand as easily as Bethany's. "He knows you are part of the family now," Bethany said, watching the interaction with pleasure. "Or he knows I always have food." But Boone smiled as he said it, clearly pleased by the hawk's acceptance. March arrived with a false spring, warm days followed by cold nights. Bethany's back ached constantly, and she could barely sleep with the baby pressing on her lungs. She was ready for this pregnancy to be over, ready to meet the little person who had been kicking her ribs for months. The labor started on a sunny afternoon while Boone was checking his trap line. Thomas Morrison had gone to the settlement for supplies, leaving Bethany alone for the first time in weeks. She felt the first contraction while hanging laundry and knew immediately what it meant. She made it inside to the bed before the second contraction hit, stronger than the first. She tried to stay calm, reminding herself that first babies took hours, that she had plenty of time. But the contractions came faster than expected, harder than the frontier women had described, and fear began to creep in around the edges. Boone found her an hour later, her water broken and contractions coming in waves. He took one look at her face and ran for the Shoshone woman who lived 3 miles east, the same one who had taught Bethany about bird calls. Running Bear Woman arrived within 30 minutes, calm and competent, and took over immediately. "First babies are unpredictable," she said in her careful English, examining Bethany with practiced hands. "This one wants to come fast." She was right. The baby arrived just before sunset, emerging into Running Bear Woman's capable hands with a lusty cry. Boone, who had been pacing the cabin like a caged wolf, rushed to the bedside as Running Bear Woman cleaned the infant and wrapped it in soft cloth. "A daughter," she announced, placing the baby in Bethany's arms. "Strong and healthy." Bethany looked down at the tiny red face, the dark hair plastered to the small skull, the miniature fingers already curling into fists. Love crashed over her like a wave, so intense it stole her breath. She had helped heal dozens of creatures, had felt joy at every recovery, but nothing compared to this. This perfect, whole, new life that she and Boone had created together. "She is beautiful," Boone whispered, his voice rough with emotion. He sat on the edge of the bed, his large hand carefully cradling the baby's head. "Absolutely beautiful." "What should we name her?" Bethany asked. They had discussed names endlessly over the winter, narrowing it down to a few favorites. Now, looking at their daughter's face, only one seemed right. "Sky," Boone said. "For the wild, open sky where we first knew we loved each other. Sky Zimmerman." Bethany tested the name, found it perfect. "Yes, that is exactly right." Running Bear Woman stayed through the night, making sure Bethany and the baby were both stable. Thomas Morrison returned near dawn to find himself a grandfather, and his joy was so complete that he actually wept, something Bethany had never seen him do. "She looks like your mother," he said, holding the baby with surprising confidence. "Same stubborn chin." "Then she is in trouble," Bethany said, laughing despite her exhaustion. The weeks after Sky's birth passed in a blur of feedings and diaper changes and sleepless nights. Boone proved to be a natural father, patient and gentle with their tiny daughter. He could settle her when Bethany's attempts failed, walking the floor with her against his broad shoulder, singing old folk songs in his deep voice. When spring truly arrived, bringing green grass and blooming wildflowers, Bethany began introducing Sky to the world beyond the cabin. She carried her outside to feel the sun, to hear the birds, to smell the pine-scented air. And when Redstone appeared one warm April morning, landing on his favorite post, Bethany lifted Sky carefully to see. "That is Redstone," she told her daughter. "He was my first patient, the first wounded thing I helped heal after we came to this place. And now he is family, just like your father, just like grandfather." The hawk tilted his head, studying the baby with apparent interest. Then he spread his wings and called out, a clear, bright sound that made Sky's eyes widen. "He is blessing her," Boone said, coming to stand beside them, welcoming her to the family. Bethany leaned into her husband's solid warmth, feeling the weight of their daughter in her arms, watching the hawk who had brought them together. Everything she had ever wanted was here in this moment. The wild mountains, the healing work she loved, a man who understood her completely, and now this precious new life to nurture and protect. "I am so happy," she said simply. Boone wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "So am I, happier than I ever thought possible." Redstone launched himself skyward, spiraling up into the brilliant blue. They watched him climb until he was just a speck against the clouds. Then he turned and dove, the way he had on that day when Bethany had released him. He passed close overhead, his shadow falling across them for just a moment, then he was gone, flying toward the high peaks. But Bethany knew he would return. He always did. Wild things had a way of coming back to the places, and people that healed them, that loved them, that gave them reason to return. Just like Boone had come back to her, day after day, until he could not stay away. Just like she would always come back to these mountains, to this life they had built together. That summer was the happiest of Bethany's life. Sky grew stronger and more alert, her eyes changing from newborn blue to gray like her father's. She responded to Redstone's cries, always turning her head to watch when the hawk appeared. Boone built a better roof on the cabin and expanded the aviary, preparing for the autumn when Bethany would resume her healing work in earnest. 2 more injured birds came through in late summer, a prairie falcon with a damaged wing and a great horned owl that had tangled with a porcupine. Bethany healed them both, working carefully with Sky strapped to her back in a cradle board Boone had made. The baby seemed to understand. She needed to be quiet during these sessions, watching with solemn eyes as her mother tended to broken wings and cleaned wounds. "She is going to grow up thinking this is normal," Boone said one evening, watching Bethany feed the owl while Sky observed from her cradle board. "Having wild raptors in the house." "It is normal," Bethany replied. "For us anyway." "For us," he agreed, smiling. In September, Boone traveled to the settlement and returned with news. The territorial government was offering land grants to families willing to file proper claims and improve their properties. If they filed, their cabin and the surrounding acres would be legally theirs, protected from prospectors and claim jumpers. "We should do it," Thomas Morrison said. "Make this official. Give Sky something permanent to inherit." Bethany looked around the cabin that had become home, thought about the aviary outside, the mountains surrounding them, the life they had built here. Yes, this should be permanent. This should be forever. They filed the claim in October, making it official with the territorial office. Boone Zimmerman and Bethany Zimmerman, 160 acres in the Wind River Range, Wyoming Territory. The land was theirs now, truly theirs, and the knowledge settled something deep in Bethany's chest. Winter came early that year, with heavy snows beginning in November. They settled in for the long, cold months, the 5 of them cozy in the expanded cabin, Bethany and Boone and Sky in one room, Thomas Morrison in his addition. The fire burned constantly, and Boone kept them supplied with game and firewood. Bethany told stories to Sky, who was too young to understand, but seemed to enjoy the sound of her mother's voice. Redstone appeared 3 times during that first month of winter, each time landing in the same spot near the cabin door. Boone always had food ready for him, and the hawk stayed longer each time, as if reluctant to return to the harsh conditions in the high country. "You could stay," Bethany told him during his 3rd visit in late November. "The aviary is empty. You could winter here with us." Redstone tilted his head, considering. Then he spread his wings and launched himself skyward, disappearing into the gray clouds. Bethany felt a pang of disappointment but understood. He was wild, meant for the open sky, not for cages however large and comfortable. But 2 days later, during a particularly fierce storm, she heard his familiar cry. Boone opened the cabin door to find Redstone huddled on the porch, his feathers roughed against the cold. The hawk hopped inside without hesitation, heading straight for the warm spot near the fire. "I will be damned," Boone said, closing the door quickly against the wind. "He actually came back. He knows where he is safe." Bethany set up a perch near the fireplace and Redstone settled on it, tucking his head under his wing. "He trusts us." The hawk stayed through the worst of the winter storms, sometimes for days at a time. He became part of the household, as much a family member as any of them. Sky grew accustomed to falling asleep to his soft night sounds, and Boone joked that their daughter's first word would probably be a hawk cry. January brought a cold snap so severe that even Boone stayed close to the cabin. The temperature dropped far below zero, and ice formed on the inside of the windows despite the roaring fire. They huddled together for warmth, all of them including Redstone, who seemed content to remain on his perch rather than venture into the brutal cold. "This is what I imagined when I thought about having a family," Boone said one night, holding Sky while Bethany dozed against his shoulder. "But the reality is better than anything I could have dreamed." "Even with a hawk sleeping in the corner?" Thomas Morrison asked, amused. "Especially with the hawk." Boone looked at Redstone fondly. "He brought us together in a way, gave me a reason to walk 8 miles to check on an injured bird." "You would have found a reason anyway," Bethany murmured, half asleep. "We were meant to be together." "Yes," Boone agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I believe we were." February brought a break in the weather, and Redstone began venturing out during the day, though he returned each evening. Bethany knew he was getting restless, preparing for spring and mating season. His mate had likely wintered at a lower elevation, and soon he would need to find her. Sure enough, on a sunny morning in early March, Redstone flew away and did not return that evening. Bethany felt the familiar ache of farewell, but knew it was right. He belonged out there, not cooped up inside with them. "Will he come back?" Boone asked, watching the empty perch with something like sadness. "He always does," Bethany assured him. "He will come back." She was right. Redstone appeared a week later with his mate, both of them circling the cabin in greeting. Over the following months, they saw the hawk pair regularly, hunting together, working on a nest in the high rocks north of the property. By summer, they had raised another clutch of young, and Bethany watched with joy as Redstone taught his offspring to hunt. Sky celebrated her first birthday in March, taking her first wobbling steps across the cabin floor. She was a happy, curious child, already showing signs of her mother's stubbornness and her father's quiet strength. Bethany watched her explore the world with fierce love and occasional terror, understanding now why her own father had worried so much. "She is going to give us gray hair," she told Boone one evening after Sky had nearly tumbled into the fire pit outside. "Undoubtedly." But Boone smiled as he said it, scooping his daughter up and tossing her gently in the air, making her shriek with laughter. "But she is worth every moment." Spring brought more injured birds to Bethany's care. Word had spread through the scattered settlements about her gift, and people began bringing her creatures they found hurt or orphaned. She healed them all if she could, releasing them back to the wild when they were ready. Sometimes they returned for visits, sometimes they disappeared forever. Either way was fine. She had learned to love with open hands, to heal without demanding gratitude or loyalty. Boone supported her work completely, helping build additional aviary space, hunting extra game to feed her patients, sitting with her late into the night when she nursed a particularly fragile creature. He understood what this work meant to her, how it fed something essential in her soul. That summer, Thomas Morrison announced he was courting a widow from the settlement, a woman named Margaret who ran a boarding house. At 62, he had not expected to find love again, but Margaret was practical and kind, and she made him laugh. Bethany was thrilled, especially when Margaret proved to be warm and welcoming to her new stepdaughter and granddaughter. They married in August, and Margaret moved into the cabin's addition. The household grew livelier with her presence, and Bethany found herself grateful for another woman's company, especially one who understood frontier life so well. "You have built something wonderful here," Margaret told Bethany one afternoon while they worked in the garden together. "A real home, full of love and purpose." "I did not build it alone," Bethany replied, glancing toward where Boone was teaching Sky to identify different bird calls. "We built it together. Even better. That winter was gentler than the previous one, with less snow and milder temperatures." Redstone and his mate both wintered near the cabin, appearing regularly for food and shelter. Bethany loved seeing them together, the easy partnership they had developed. It reminded her of her own marriage, the way she and Boone moved through life in tandem, always supporting and protecting each other. In late winter, Bethany realized she was pregnant again. The news brought joy and some anxiety. Sky was barely 2 years old, and Bethany remembered how exhausting the infant stage had been. But Boone was delighted, already planning expansions to the cabin, talking about teaching both children to track and hunt and understand the wild world. "Boy or girl, do you think?" he asked, his hand on her still flat stomach. "Does it matter?" "Not even a little." He kissed her gently. "I will love whatever you give me." This pregnancy felt different from the first, easier in some ways, harder in others. Bethany knew what to expect now, which helped with the anxiety but made the physical discomfort seem longer. Sky was demanding and active, requiring constant attention, leaving Bethany exhausted by evening, but Boone stepped up in every way that mattered. He took over more of the daily work, entertained Sky for hours so Bethany could rest, massaged her aching back and swollen feet. Margaret helped too, cooking meals and minding Sky when Bethany needed to sleep. "I could not do this without all of you," Bethany said one evening, looking around at her family gathered in the cabin. "You will never have to," Boone replied simply. "We are all in this together." The baby arrived in early November, another daughter they named River for the waterways that fed the valley. She had Bethany's dark hair and Boone's gray eyes, and from the moment she drew her first breath, she seemed determined to make her presence known. She cried louder, ate more vigorously, and demanded attention more insistently than Sky ever had. "We have got a handful with this one," Margaret observed, laughing as River screamed during a diaper change. "She knows what she wants," Boone said proudly, settling the baby against his shoulder where she immediately calmed. "That is a good quality." Sky adjusted to her new sister with surprising grace, treating the baby like a fascinating toy. She wanted to hold River constantly, to help with feeding and bathing, to show her everything she herself had learned. Bethany watched her daughters together and felt her heart might burst with love. That winter passed in a blur of baby care and toddler chaos. The cabin felt smaller with 6 people and occasional raptors, but somehow they made it work. Boone and Thomas Morrison talked about building a separate structure come spring, giving the growing family more space. Redstone continued his regular visits, now bringing his mate and older offspring. Bethany loved watching the Hawk family interact, the way Redstone taught his young ones to hunt and survive. It reminded her that family was not just about blood, but about teaching and protecting and giving the next generation tools they needed to thrive. Spring arrived with mud and meltwater, and the first green shoots pushing through the soil. As promised, Boone and Thomas Morrison began work on a second cabin, building it 20 feet from the original. It would house Thomas and Margaret, giving the main cabin back to Boone's growing family. The work took most of the summer, with neighbors helping when they could. By September, the new structure was complete, and Thomas and Margaret moved their belongings across. Bethany felt a pang at the separation, but it was good to have more space, especially with two small children requiring constant supervision. That autumn brought an early cold snap, and with it, a young golden eagle with a broken wing. Someone had shot it, likely mistaking it for a chicken thief, and the damage was severe. Bethany knew from the moment she examined the bird that healing it would be difficult, maybe impossible. But she tried anyway, working long hours to stabilize the wing, fighting infection, coaxing the eagle to eat. Boone helped her, holding the massive bird still while she changed bandages, admiring its fierce beauty even in injury. "This was like your eagle," Bethany said one evening while they worked. "The one you told me about. Close enough." Boone stroked the golden feathers carefully. Same fierce spirit, same determination to survive. The eagle did survive, though the healing took months. By the time Bethany released it the following spring, River was walking and Sky was talking in full sentences. The entire family gathered to watch the eagle launch itself skyward, climbing toward the peaks with powerful wing beats. "Will it come back like Redstone does?" Sky asked, her small hand tucked into Bethany's. "Maybe," Bethany said. "Or maybe it will fly far away and build a life somewhere else. Either way is good as long as it is free and whole." But the eagle did return just a month later, landing near the cabin with a rabbit in its talons. It dropped the rabbit at Bethany's feet, then spread its wings and called out before flying away. "Payment," Boone said, grinning. "It brought you payment for the healing." "That is a first." Bethany picked up the rabbit, already planning to use it for stew. "I should start charging fees." "We would never want for meat." They laughed together, and Bethany felt the deep contentment that came from living in harmony with the wild world. She had found her place, her purpose, her people. The wounded things came to her and she made them whole, and in doing so, she herself remained whole. Years passed in the steady rhythm of seasons. Winters brought storms and cozy evenings by the fire. Springs brought new life and injured creatures needing care. Summers meant long days working the land and teaching her daughters about the mountains. Autumns brought harvest and preparation for the cold months ahead. Sky and River grew tall and strong, learning to track and hunt from their father, learning to heal and tend from their mother. They were wild mountain girls, comfortable in the wilderness, confident in their abilities. Bethany watched them with pride, knowing they would be capable of anything they chose to do. Redstone remained a constant presence, appearing regularly with his mate and offspring. Over the years, Bethany watched him age, saw the gray creep into his feathers, noticed how his flights grew shorter. But his eyes remained sharp and his spirit stayed fierce. When Sky was 12 and River 10, Redstone appeared one autumn morning looking frail. He landed on his favorite post and did not move, his feathers ruffed, his breathing labored. Bethany knew immediately what this meant. She carried him inside and made him comfortable near the fire, offering food and water he would not take. Boone sat with her, holding her hand while she held the hawk. The girls came to say goodbye, both of them crying, understanding what was happening. "Thank you," Bethany whispered to Redstone. "Thank you for coming back that first time. Thank you for bringing him to me." The hawk opened his eyes, fixing her with that golden stare one last time. Then he closed them and went still, his breathing stopping, his heart ceasing to beat. He died in her hands, peaceful and comfortable, surrounded by the family he had helped create. They buried him on the ridge overlooking the valley, marking the grave with stones. Redstone's mate circled overhead during the burial, calling out in what sounded like mourning. Then she flew away, and they did not see her again that winter. Bethany grieved for the hawk who had been her first patient, her constant companion, her connection to Boone. But she also felt grateful for the years they had shared, for the way he had kept returning, choosing them over complete freedom. He had a good life, Boone said that evening, holding her while she cried. Wild and free, but always knowing he had a home to return to. That is all any creature can ask for. I miss him already, so do I. Boone pressed a kiss to her hair. But we have his legacy. His offspring still hunt these mountains. His spirit lives on in this place, in our family. Spring came, and with it, a young red tail who had tangled with barbed wire. Bethany healed him carefully, working with the same techniques she had used on Redstone all those years ago. When she released him, she felt the familiar bittersweet ache, the joy of setting something free mixed with the sadness of goodbye. But this hawk returned too, just like Redstone had. And like Redstone, he kept returning, building his life in the area but always coming back to the cabin where he had been healed. Sky named him Copper for the burnished color of his tail feathers, and he became their new constant companion. The pattern continued year after year. Hawks and eagles and owls came injured or orphaned, and Bethany healed them. Some disappeared forever, some returned occasionally, and some, like Copper, became permanent fixtures in their lives. The cabin gained a reputation as a place of healing, a sanctuary for wounded things. When Sky was 17, she began courting a young trapper named Daniel who respected her knowledge of the mountains and her gift with birds. Bethany watched her daughter fall in love and felt the circle completing. Sky would marry and likely stay in the area, building her own cabin, raising her own children in these mountains. River proved more restless, talking about traveling east to study medicine formally, about bringing book learning back to the frontier. Bethany encouraged her, knowing some birds needed to fly far away before they could come home. Let her go, Boone counseled when Bethany worried about River leaving. She will come back if this is where she belongs, and if she does not, we will know she found somewhere better. River left when she was 18, heading east with a wagon train and promises to write. The letters came regularly, full of descriptions of cities and schools and ideas. Bethany missed her desperately, but felt proud of her daughter's courage and ambition. Sky married Daniel the following summer, and they built a cabin 5 miles south, close enough to visit regularly but far enough for independence. Within a year, Sky was pregnant, and Bethany prepared to become a grandmother. The thought made her feel ancient and thrilled all at once. Thomas Morrison died peacefully in his sleep the winter Bethany turned 43 with Margaret beside him. They buried him next to Redstone on the ridge, and Margaret moved back into the main cabin, unwilling to live alone. Bethany welcomed her, grateful for her company as her household emptied. But it did not stay empty for long. Sky's children came often, and they brought their own injured animals for Grandma Bethany to heal. River returned home after 5 years with a medical degree and a quiet determination to serve frontier communities. She set up practice in the settlement, visiting the cabin weekly to check on her mother and share stories. Boone aged into his 50s with the same quiet strength he had always possessed. His hair went gray, his beard went white, but his eyes remained sharp and his hands remained steady. He still trapped and hunted, still provided for their household, still kissed Bethany every morning like they were newlyweds. "We have built a good life," he said one evening when they were alone on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. "The best life," Bethany agreed, leaning into his warmth. "Better than I ever imagined possible. Do you ever regret staying here, wonder what life would have been like somewhere easier?" "Never." She turned to look at him, wanting him to see the truth in her eyes. "This is where I belong. With you in these mountains, healing wounded things and watching them fly free." "I love you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "More now than I did the day we married, and I thought that was impossible. I love you too." She kissed him softly. "Always. Forever." Copper appeared overhead, circling and calling out his presence. He was 5 years old now, with a mate and territory of his own, but he still visited regularly. Bethany watched him climb toward the darkening sky and felt her heart full to bursting. This was her life. Wounded hawks returning to her arm, her mountain man never staying away, children and grandchildren carrying on the legacy of healing and wildness. She had helped broken things become whole, and in the process, she had become whole herself. The night settled in around them, stars emerging one by one in the vast Wyoming sky. Somewhere in the darkness, a great horned owl called out. Somewhere higher up, Copper settled into his nighttime roost. And here on the porch, Bethany and Boone sat together, two wild things who had found each other and built something permanent and beautiful. When they finally went inside, Margaret was already asleep in her corner. The cabin was quiet except for the crackle of the dying fire. Bethany banked the coals for morning while Boone checked the door and windows. They moved through their nighttime routine with the ease of decades of practice, comfortable in the silence, secure in their partnership. In bed, Boone pulled her close, and she settled against his familiar bulk. His heartbeat was steady beneath her ear, a sound she had fallen asleep to for over 20 years. Outside, the wind sang through the pines, carrying the scent of snow coming from the high peaks. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" "For walking 8 miles to check on an injured hawk. For seeing me. For staying. I am the one who should thank you." His arms tightened around her. "You healed me too, you know. I was just as wounded as Redstone when I found you. I just did not have blood on my wings." Bethany thought about that, about the lonely mountain man who had tracked an injured hawk because he could not bear to see it suffer. About how he had kept returning, drawn by something he could not name but could not resist. About how love had transformed them both, making them better and stronger than they could have been alone. "We healed each other," she said finally. "That is what love does." "Yes." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "That is exactly what love does." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, secure in the knowledge that they would wake together and face another day in their wild, beautiful life. The hawks would return, the seasons would turn, the mountains would stand eternal. And through it all, they would remain Boone and Bethany Zimmerman, healing the wounded things and loving each other with the fierce devotion of wild creatures who had chosen to stay. Years continued to pass. Sky and Daniel had 4 children, all of them learning the ways of the mountains and the art of bird healing from their grandmother. River married late, to a fellow doctor, and they established a clinic that served the growing settlements. She had 2 children of her own, and though she lived in town, she brought them to the cabin often to learn about their heritage. Bethany's reputation spread wider. People came from hundreds of miles away with injured raptors, trusting her skill and knowledge. She healed golden eagles and prairie falcons, kestrels and harriers, owls of every description. Some lived, some died, but she tried for all of them, giving each creature her full attention and care. Boone supported her work until his dying day. When he was 65 and she was 60, his heart gave out while he was checking his trap line. Daniel found him sitting against a pine tree, his rifle across his lap, a peaceful expression on his face. He had died doing what he loved in the mountains he called home. Bethany grieved deeply, but without bitterness. They had been given 38 years together, which was more than many received. She had loved him completely and been loved completely in return. The pain of loss was the price of that love, and she would pay it gladly for what they had shared. She buried him on the ridge beside her father in Redstone, marking his grave with a stone Daniel carved with the words Boone Zimmerman, Mountain Man, beloved husband and father. The entire family gathered for the burial, along with neighbors and friends from all over the territory. Copper circled overhead during the ceremony, calling out in what sounded like farewell. After Boone's death, Bethany continued her work. The healing kept her grounded, gave her purpose, connected her to the life she and Boone had built together. She taught her grandchildren everything she knew, passing down the knowledge she had gained over decades. Several of them showed real aptitude, particularly Sky's oldest daughter, Ivy, who had her grandmother's patience and intuition with wild things. When Bethany was 72, a young red-tailed hawk came to her with a gunshot wound to the wing. The injury was eerily similar to Redstone's all those decades ago, and Bethany felt time collapse as she worked on the bird. Her hands were older now, marked with age spots and arthritis, but they still knew what to do. She healed the hawk over 2 weeks, and when she released him, he circled 3 times before flying south, exactly as Redstone had done. Bethany watched him go with tears streaming down her face, remembering that day so long ago when a wounded hawk had brought a mountain man into her life and changed everything. "Thank you," she whispered to the sky, to the spirits of Boone and Redstone and all the wild things she had loved. "Thank you for this beautiful, impossible life." The hawk returned the next day, landing on the post Redstone had favored. And like Redstone before him, he kept returning, building his life in the area but always coming back to the woman who had saved him. Ivy named him Phoenix, and he became the newest member of their extended family of wild things. Bethany lived to be 87, remaining sharp and capable until the very end. She died peacefully in her sleep on a spring morning, with Margaret holding one hand and Ivy holding the other. Phoenix was perched on the windowsill, watching through the glass, and as Bethany drew her last breath, he called out once, clear and bright. They buried her on the ridge beside Boone, and every hawk in the valley seemed to appear that day, circling overhead in tribute to the woman who had spent her life healing their kind. Phoenix stayed on her grave for 3 days, refusing food or water, mourning in the way wild things mourn those they love. The cabin remained in the family, passing down through generations. The healing work continued, with Ivy taking up her grandmother's mantle and teaching her own children the art of mending broken wings. The story of Bethany Morrison Zimmerman became legend in the territory, the woman who could gentle the fiercest raptor, who had built a life of purpose and love in the wildest of places. And the hawks continued to return, generation after generation, coming to the cabin when they were injured or orphaned, trusting the humans there to heal them and set them free. Just as Redstone had returned to Bethany's arm, just as Boone had kept coming back until he could not stay away, the birds kept returning to the place where wounded things became whole. The legacy lasted long after Bethany and Boone were gone, a testament to the power of healing and the enduring bond between wild things and the people brave enough to love them. In the Wind River Range of Wyoming, where the sky stretches endless and the mountains stand eternal, that legacy lives on still, carried forward by those who understand that the greatest gift is not capturing what is wild, but helping it heal so it can fly free again. And sometimes, if you stand on that ridge at sunset, you can still hear the cry of a red-tailed hawk circling overhead, calling out to the spirits of the woman and man who built sanctuary in the wilderness and loved each other with the fierce devotion of wild hearts choosing to stay.